Before you were even a thought in your parents' minds, heaven had already finished the blueprint of your destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, you didn't just stumble into this season by accident. You are standing at the threshold of a moment that was etched into eternity long before you took your first breath. I came to tell you today, God said, it's all planned for the start of May. Not next year, not someday. May. The divine calendar has been marked. The appointments have been scheduled. The breakthroughs have been organized. The resources have been assigned. The doors have been commanded to open. You are not waiting on God. God is waiting on you to step into what He has already orchestrated. When we consider the nature of God's timing, it's important to understand that God does not operate within the same boundaries as humans. In our finite world, time is a measured entity, something we live by. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, and years determine our actions, goals, and lives. Our plans are scheduled around the constraints of time, and our expectations are set by the pace at which time moves forward. But God is not bound by these limits. He is eternal, the creator of time, and He transcends its constraints. To grasp the full weight of this, we must acknowledge that God's timing is perfect, and His plans are already completed, even before we step into the process. This perspective is hard to grasp because we often think of time as linear, something that moves forward progressively. We experience moments and anticipate future ones, but God sees all of time as one eternal moment. In the eyes of God, the past, present, and future exist simultaneously. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. When God declares something, it is not just a promise for the future. It is an absolute certainty that has already been realized in eternity. So, when God says something is planned for a particular time, such as the beginning of May, He's speaking from an eternal perspective, not from the limited scope of human time. This brings us to the truth that timing in the kingdom of God is not a matter of waiting for something to happen. It is the recognition that God has already arranged everything according to His perfect will. Every plan, every purpose, and every season of your life was preordained by God before the foundations of the earth were laid. The challenge for us as human beings is not about trying to control or manipulate time to fit our desires, but understanding that God's timing aligns with His perfect purpose for our lives. Imagine a builder designing and constructing a house. The blueprint for the house is drawn out first, showing every detail, every room, and every structure. The builder doesn't simply throw together walls without knowing how they fit into the overall plan. Each part is intentionally placed, and the house is constructed piece by piece, according to the plan. In the same way, God has already designed the blueprint of your life, and every season, every delay, every breakthrough, and every trial fits perfectly into His plan. When He speaks, it's as though He is revealing a part of the blueprint of your life that is now about to be made visible to you. Your job is to step into it. God's timing is also important because it serves a greater purpose than we can often see in the moment. When we look at our own lives and the events that unfold, we may see them as isolated incidents or isolated moments in time. However, in the grand scope of God's eternal plan, each event serves a specific purpose. We may not understand why certain things happen at specific times, but God is weaving them together for His glory. When you experience delays or setbacks, it is easy to assume that God is somehow not in control, or that your situation is outside of His timing. However, if you truly understand that God sees the end from the beginning, you'll begin to realize that every moment is part of His divine orchestration. Consider the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's life seemed to be marked by a series of unfortunate events. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, and forgotten by those he helped. From a human perspective, it seemed like Joseph's life was on a downward spiral, with no purpose or clear direction. Yet, God's timing was perfect. Everything that happened to Joseph, even the darkest moments, was positioning him for the moment when he would stand before Pharaoh and become second in command over all of Egypt. In that moment, God's purpose for Joseph's life was revealed, and he was able to save not only Egypt, but also his own family. Had any part of the process happened sooner or later, the outcome would have been different. God's timing, although mysterious and often difficult to understand, was never wrong. This is where many of us struggle. We get caught up in the limitations of our own perception of time. We want things to happen immediately, and we get frustrated when they don't unfold according to our timeline. We set goals and deadlines for ourselves, and when those goals aren't achieved in the way we expect, we become discouraged. But God doesn't work on our timeline. The very fact that God operates on an eternal timeline means that His plan for our lives is far more expansive than we can comprehend. What may seem like a delay or a detour is actually a divine appointment, carefully arranged by God. God's perfect timing also emphasizes the importance of patience and trust. As human beings, we often want things now. We live in a culture where everything is instant food, instant messaging, instant entertainment. But God calls us to a different way of living, one that requires patience and trust in His timing. When God says something will happen at a specific time, He is not simply inviting us to wait passively. He is inviting us to trust His perfect plan, knowing that when the appointed time comes, everything will fall into place. When we are able to embrace God's timing, we begin to realize that waiting is not wasted time. In the waiting, God is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for what is to come. Waiting teaches us patience, endurance, and faith. It is in the waiting that we learn to trust God more deeply, to rely on His provision, and to surrender our desires to His will. God's timing works in perfect harmony with His purpose. He is not trying to punish us or hold back blessings from us. Instead, He is preparing us to handle the blessings He is about to release into our lives. As we approach the start of May, we must recognize that it is not just another month on the calendar. It is a divinely appointed time. The waiting has not been in vain. Everything that has happened before now has been part of God's perfect plan to bring us to this point. And when May arrives, it will not be by accident or coincidence that certain things fall into place. It will be the fulfillment of a divine timeline, meticulously crafted by a loving and sovereign God who has never lost control. Understanding God's timing isn't about figuring out when exactly He will act. It's about trusting that when He does, it will be exactly the right time. His plan is perfect, His timing is flawless, and His purpose for you is unshakable. As you step into this next season, remember that you are not waiting on God. He is waiting on you to recognize and step into the appointed time He has prepared for you. Embrace His timing with faith, for when God's time comes, nothing can stand in its way. God's plans for your life were never in question. Long before you were born, before you took your first steps or even said your first word, God had already set in motion a plan that would guide you, shape you, and bring you into alignment with His will. When we talk about God's plans being already set, we are speaking of the sovereignty of God. This means that God is in control of everything, the good, the bad, and everything in between, all fit within His perfect design. There is no chaos in God's plan. Every event, every action, every decision is part of a greater purpose that is unfolding in His perfect timing. One of the most profound truths that we must come to grips with as believers is the reality that God's plan for us is complete. We often struggle with the idea of our future because we look at our present circumstances and they don't seem to match up with the vision we have in our hearts. We want things now, and when they don't happen immediately, we begin to question God's faithfulness, or worse, question the plan itself. However, the Bible makes it clear that God has already determined the paths we will take. It's easy to look at life through the lens of our human experience, but God operates from a much higher vantage point. Imagine a person who is watching a movie for the second time. The first time they watch it, they experience suspense, tension, and surprise as the plot unfolds. However, when they watch it again, they already know the ending. They understand why certain characters acted the way they did, and they see how every twist and turn was leading to the resolution. In the same way, God has seen the beginning and the end of our lives. He is not surprised by what happens along the way. He is guiding us toward the outcome He has already determined. His plans for us are already set, and they are perfect in every way. What we sometimes fail to realize is that God's plan is not dependent on our ability to figure things out. It's not contingent upon us seeing the full picture at any given moment. We are not required to understand every detail before we act or move forward. Faith is about trusting that God knows the way, even when we don't. We walk by faith, not by sight, and that's because God has already set our course. As we take steps forward, sometimes blindly, we are not stepping into uncertainty. Instead, we are stepping into the purpose God has already laid out for us. When we say that God's plans are already set, it speaks to the absolute certainty of His will. There is no room for error, no ambiguity in His purpose. He has predestined us to walk in good works, and He is the one who orders our steps. The moments of uncertainty, the moments of waiting, and the moments of seeming failure are all part of the divine plan that is already laid out for us. We may not see how it all fits together, but that does not mean God's plan is any less real or powerful. His purposes are eternal, and they are unshakable. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians 2:10, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." This scripture speaks directly to the fact that God has already prepared the path for us, even before we began our journey. There is nothing that happens in our lives that catches God off guard. His plan for us is so perfectly designed that He has already provided the opportunities, the resources, and the relationships necessary to fulfill His purpose. This means that we are not chasing after things in our own strength. Instead, we are walking in alignment with a plan that was set in motion long before we even knew what our lives would look like. One of the most liberating aspects of this truth is the realization that we do not have to create our future. Many of us spend so much time trying to figure out what to do with our lives, striving to make the right decisions and stressing over every choice. But God's plan has already been established. It's not about us trying to create a future. It's about us cooperating with the future that God has already created for us. Every step of the way is guided by His hand, and He has already seen the outcome. As we submit our plans to His will, we align ourselves with the perfect course that God has designed. When we step into this understanding, it should radically shift the way we approach life. We no longer need to feel lost or unsure. We no longer need to waste time worrying about the unknown. God has already planned the path before us, and we can trust that as we walk, He will reveal the next steps in His perfect timing. This does not mean we will not face challenges or obstacles along the way. It doesn't mean we won't encounter moments of frustration or confusion, but it does mean that no matter what we face, we can trust that God is working all things together for our good. Take a moment to think about how your life has unfolded thus far. Reflect on the people you've met, the opportunities that have come your way, and the doors that have opened or closed. Look back at the difficulties you've faced and the lessons you've learned through them. Even in moments when you couldn't see God's hand, He was orchestrating every detail for your benefit. What you may have perceived as a detour was simply a part of the larger plan. Even in the waiting, even in the uncertainty, God's plan was unfolding. He is the one who makes all things work together for good, even when we cannot see how. We also have to recognize that God's plans are always better than our own. We may have our own desires, our own dreams, and our own vision of how we want things to unfold. But God's plan is always more expansive and more beautiful than anything we can imagine. He knows what is best for us, and He has already arranged everything in a way that will lead us to our ultimate purpose. Trusting God's plan means that we surrender our own will and trust that He knows what is best. It means we trust Him with our future, knowing that He is already ahead of us, preparing the way. God's plans are also good, even when we don't understand them. In Jeremiah 29:11, God declares, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Even when life takes unexpected turns or when things don't go according to our own plans, we can trust that God's plan is good. His plan is filled with hope, and it is always working toward our good. As we approach the start of May and reflect on the unfolding of God's plan, let us remember that His will is already set. It is not subject to our opinions or circumstances. His plans are perfect, and His timing is flawless. All that is required of us is to walk in faith, trust His process, and submit ourselves to His will, knowing that He has already determined the best path for our lives. We are not in this journey alone. God's plans have already been set, and He will guide us every step of the way. When we encounter obstacles in life, it's easy to view them as roadblocks, as though they are signs that we're on the wrong path, or that our dreams are unattainable. We may think that a lack of progress or unexpected challenges mean that something is wrong with our journey, or that God is somehow withholding His blessings from us. But the truth is that obstacles are often the very thing that prepares us for the blessings that God has in store. They are not denials, but divine preparations. Obstacles are a part of life that no one can avoid. We all face moments where things don't go according to plan, where the road becomes rough and uncertain. These times can feel like setbacks, moments where we wonder if we're doing the right thing or if we should give up altogether. However, if we take a step back and view our obstacles through the lens of faith, we'll begin to see them not as signs of failure, but as signs of growth. God is not in the business of making our lives easy. He is in the business of making us strong, resilient, and capable of handling the great purpose He has placed within us. One of the most powerful lessons we can learn as believers is to recognize that every challenge, every setback, and every obstacle we face is part of a divine plan that is working in our favor. God is never surprised by the things that come our way. He knew that we would face struggles, but He also knows that these struggles are the very tools He uses to shape us into who He has called us to be. The process of overcoming challenges is what develops our character, deepens our faith, and strengthens our ability to handle the blessings that are coming our way. In fact, obstacles are often the things that equip us for the next level of our destiny. Without the struggle, there can be no victory. Without the fire, there can be no refinement. The Bible tells us that we are to consider it pure joy when we face trials, because they produce perseverance, character, and hope. In James 1:2-4, we are reminded, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." This is the perspective that we must adopt when facing obstacles. Instead of viewing them as setbacks, we must view them as opportunities for growth. God knows that we are not ready to receive His full blessings without being properly prepared. Just like a gardener who prunes a tree to help it grow stronger and bear better fruit, God sometimes allows obstacles to come into our lives to prepare us for what's ahead. This doesn't mean that God causes bad things to happen to us, but it does mean that He can use the challenges of life to refine us, to strengthen our faith, and to make us better suited to handle the great things He has planned for us. There are countless examples in the Bible of individuals who faced obstacles on their journey to fulfill God's purpose. One of the most well-known examples is the story of Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused of a crime and thrown into prison. His life seemed like a series of setbacks, but God was using each obstacle to prepare him for the position of power and influence that would eventually save not only Egypt but also his own family. If Joseph had not been sold into slavery, he would never have been in a position to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. If he had not been thrown into prison, he would never have met the butler who would eventually speak on his behalf to Pharaoh. Each obstacle Joseph faced was not a denial of his dream, but a step toward its fulfillment. The Apostle Paul faced many obstacles in his ministry. He was imprisoned, beaten, shipwrecked, and misunderstood. Yet he never saw these struggles as signs that he was failing in his mission. Instead, he saw them as opportunities to grow in faith and to trust God more fully. In Corinthians 12:9-10, Paul writes, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" Paul understood that the obstacles he faced were not signs of rejection from God, but opportunities to rely more on His grace and power. The truth is, obstacles are often necessary for the development of our faith. Without challenges, we would never know the depth of God's power to overcome them. Without struggle, we would never experience the peace that surpasses understanding. Without waiting, we would never experience the joy of seeing God's promises come to pass in His perfect timing. Every challenge we face is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become more like Christ. When we face obstacles, we must also remember that God is not distant from us in our struggles. He is right there in the midst of it, walking with us every step of the way. In fact, God often uses the most difficult times to draw us closer to Him. It is in our moments of weakness that we are most aware of our need for God's strength. And it is in our moments of difficulty that we experience His presence in ways that we may not otherwise. When we lean on God during our trials, we are drawn into a deeper relationship with Him, and our faith is made stronger. This perspective shifts the way we view our challenges. Instead of seeing them as obstacles to our success, we begin to see them as opportunities to grow stronger, to trust God more fully, and to prepare ourselves for the blessings that are coming. When we face difficulties, we can ask God to help us see the lesson He is teaching us, to give us the strength to endure, and to prepare us for the next season of growth and opportunity. The obstacles we face are not meant to keep us stuck. They are meant to propel us forward into the next chapter of God's plan for our lives. As we look ahead to the start of May, let us remember that every obstacle we face is part of a greater plan that is unfolding. The challenges you have faced and the challenges that are still to come are not signs that you are being denied what God has promised you. They are the very things that are preparing you for what's next. Each setback is a setup for a greater comeback. Each challenge is an opportunity for you to grow in your faith and to trust God more deeply. As you move forward, Know that God is using every obstacle to prepare you for the blessings He is about to pour out into your life. Faith is the cornerstone of our relationship with God, and it is what enables us to move forward in life despite the uncertainties we face. In times when the world around us seems unpredictable and chaotic, our faith in God serves as our anchor, holding us steady and allowing us to trust that He is working all things together for our good. However, faith is not simply a passive belief. It is an active force that empowers us to walk confidently in the direction of God's will, even when we cannot see the full picture. Faith allows us to take steps in the unknown, to trust when the path ahead seems unclear, and to rely on God's perfect timing and plan for our lives. Trust is the foundation upon which faith is built. To trust God means to believe that He is who He says He is, and that He will do exactly what He has promised to do. Trusting in God is not about understanding every detail or knowing how things will unfold. It is about surrendering our own need for control and placing our confidence in the one who holds the future. Trusting God means acknowledging that His wisdom far surpasses our own, and that His plans for our lives are good, even when they don't make sense in the moment. In Hebrews 11:1, we read that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This verse highlights one of the most profound truths about faith. It is a belief in things that are not yet visible or tangible. We cannot always see the outcome of our faith, and sometimes the path that God leads us on seems uncertain or even impossible. Yet, faith tells us that even when we cannot see, God is still working, and He is faithful to bring about the promises He has spoken over our lives. One of the challenges we face as human beings is the desire for immediate answers and quick resolutions. In a world where we can access information instantly and expect rapid results, waiting on God can feel difficult. But the role of faith in God's plan is to recognize that waiting is part of the process. Waiting is not wasted time. It is a season of preparation and growth. It is in the waiting that we learn to trust God more deeply and to rely on His timing instead of our own. In moments of waiting, it is easy to question whether God has forgotten about us or whether He is truly in control. We may look at our circumstances and wonder why things are not unfolding as we hoped or expected. But faith calls us to trust God even when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are. Faith allows us to hold on to the promise that God is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail of our lives for His glory and our good. Consider the story of Abraham, who is often referred to as the father of faith. God made a promise to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. But this promise seemed impossible. Abraham and his wife Sarah were advanced in age and they had no children. Yet God's promise was unwavering, and Abraham had to trust God's word even when it seemed unreasonable. The journey was not immediate. It took years for the promise to come to pass, but Abraham's faith never wavered. He trusted in God's faithfulness, and in time, God's promise was fulfilled. Abraham's story shows us that faith is not always about seeing immediate results, but about trusting God over the long haul, knowing that He will bring His promises to fruition in His perfect time. The Israelites' journey through the wilderness provides another example of faith in God's plan. They had been delivered from slavery in Egypt and were on their way to the promised land. However, the journey was long, and there were many obstacles along the way. Despite the challenges they faced, God remained faithful to them, leading them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Yet, during moments of hardship, the Israelites struggled to trust God's plan, and they complained about their circumstances. Their lack of faith caused them to miss out on the fullness of God's promise in that moment. The lesson here is that faith in God's plan requires perseverance, especially when things aren't going according to our expectations. Faith also requires us to believe in God's goodness, even when we are walking through the valleys of life. There are moments when we will face trials that test our faith to the limit. In these times, it is easy to doubt God's goodness or question whether He truly cares about us. But faith reminds us that God is good, and His nature is always trustworthy. In Psalm 34:8, we are told to taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in Him. Even when we do not understand what God is doing, we can trust in His character. He is loving, He is faithful, and He is always working for our ultimate good. Trusting God with our future means that we must surrender our own desires and timelines to His will. Often we make plans and set goals based on what we think is best for us. But trusting God means acknowledging that His plans are higher than our own. In Isaiah 55:8-9, God reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." When we trust in God's plan, we are letting go of our own limited perspective and trusting that He sees the big picture, a picture that we cannot fully comprehend. Sometimes, the greatest challenge to trusting God is the fear of the unknown. We may worry about what will happen next, or whether we will be able to handle what lies ahead. But faith calls us to move forward, even in the face of uncertainty. It is trusting that God will provide, protect, and guide us, no matter what the future holds. Proverbs 3:5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Trusting God means giving up our need for control and submitting ourselves to His will, knowing that He will lead us where we need to go. Faith is not just about what we believe, it is also about how we act on that belief. True faith requires action. It calls us to step out in obedience, even when we don't fully understand the path ahead. It means trusting God with our finances, our relationships, our careers, and our dreams. It means believing that God has a good plan for our lives and that He will provide everything we need along the way. James 2:17 tells us, "Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Faith is not passive. It is active and requires us to step out even when the outcome is uncertain. As we enter the season of May, let us be reminded of the importance of faith and trust in God's plan. The journey ahead may not always be easy, and there may be moments when doubt creeps in. But we can take comfort in knowing that God is faithful, that His plan is already set, and that He will guide us every step of the way. Trusting God with our future allows us to rest in the assurance that He is in control and that His timing is always perfect. There is one element of our journey through life that we must understand deeply. God's timing is perfect. This is not just a nice statement to make when we are facing seasons of waiting. It is an absolute truth that underpins every aspect of our faith journey. The timing of God's plan for our lives is never early, and it is never late. It is always precisely when it needs to be. This truth brings us comfort and assurance because it means that God in His wisdom has set everything into motion in such a way that it will unfold perfectly. Our lives are not subject to randomness, nor are they controlled by chance. They are unfolding in the exact timing that God has designed for us. The struggle with timing comes when we try to impose our own sense of urgency on the situation. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm. We have access to immediate results, fast food, and rapid communication. This has created in us an expectation that things should happen quickly, and when they don't, we become frustrated, anxious, or even discouraged. But God's timing does not operate according to the world's standards. His timing is based on His perfect knowledge, His infinite wisdom, and His understanding of what is best for us. He knows the end from the beginning, and because He sees all things, He knows exactly when each part of His plan should unfold. When we align ourselves with His timing, we experience peace and purpose, even in the midst of uncertainty. One of the challenges of waiting on God's timing is that it often requires patience. Patience is a virtue that is developed over time, and it is cultivated through seasons of waiting. In our impatience, we often question God's timing, thinking that He has forgotten us or that He is delaying our blessings for no reason. But the truth is, God's delays are not denials. He is never late, and He is always on time. In fact, the moments of waiting are often the times when God is preparing us for something greater. We may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but when we look back, we often see that God's timing was not only perfect, but that the delay was necessary for our growth and the fulfillment of His plan. Consider the story of David. As a young man, David was anointed by God to be king of Israel, yet it would be many years before he actually sat on the throne. During this time, David faced immense trials, including being pursued by King Saul, the very king he was anointed to replace. It would have been easy for David to become discouraged or to try to force the throne into his own hands. Yet, David trusted God's timing even when it seemed like the fulfillment of God's promise was being delayed. He waited patiently, and in God's perfect time, he was crowned king of Israel. David's story illustrates the importance of waiting on God's timing, even when the fulfillment of His promise feels distant. In the life of Jesus, we see the perfect timing of God's plan unfolding. Jesus' ministry did not begin until He was 30 years old, even though He was the Son of God. There were moments in His life when He could have stepped into His role earlier, but He waited for the appointed time. In John 7:6-8, when His brothers urged Him to go to Judea, Jesus responded, "My time has not yet come." Jesus understood that His purpose could not be rushed. He knew that the fulfillment of His mission depended on God's perfect timing. Every miracle, every teaching, every moment of His ministry was orchestrated to align with God's will and timing. He did not act on impulse or hurry the process. Instead, He trusted that everything would happen when it needed to happen. In our own lives, we must come to understand that God's timing works for our benefit, even when we cannot see the reasons behind the delays. God's delays are often His way of preparing us for what's ahead. Whether it's a relationship, a job opportunity, or a dream that seems out of reach, God's perfect timing ensures that we are ready for the next step when the time comes. For instance, if we receive a blessing before we are ready for it, we may not have the maturity or wisdom to handle it well. But when we wait for God's timing, we are refined and prepared to steward that blessing with gratitude and responsibility. One of the most profound aspects of God's timing is that it is never just about us. God's timing also considers the bigger picture. When He delays something in our lives, it may not just be about preparing us, but also about preparing others who are part of the divine plan. We often think that when something is delayed, it is simply because we are not ready. But the truth is that God may be working behind the scenes to align other pieces of His plan. Perhaps God is waiting for the right person to cross our path, or for a specific event to take place in the world that will create the perfect opportunity for us. We are not just individual actors in a story. We are part of a much greater narrative that God is orchestrating. The Bible tells us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This verse speaks to the fact that God's timing is always for our good. While we may not always understand why things happen when they do, we can trust that they will be beautiful when they happen. God is weaving our lives into a masterpiece, and every moment, every delay, and every season is part of His greater plan. His timing ensures that everything will come together at the right time, and when it does, we will be able to look back and see how perfectly everything was orchestrated. Another aspect of God's perfect timing is the peace that comes when we trust Him with our future. When we know that God's timing is perfect, we no longer feel the need to rush through life, to force things to happen, or to make things work on our own. We can rest in the assurance that He is in control, and that when the time is right, everything will fall into place. This peace comes from the knowledge that God is not only guiding us, but that He is orchestrating the events of our lives according to His perfect will. As Psalm 31:15 says, "My times are in your hands." We can rest in the assurance that our lives are in the hands of a loving, all-knowing God who has a perfect plan for us. The more we trust in God's timing, the more we begin to experience His peace in our hearts. We stop fighting against the natural flow of life and start moving with it. We stop trying to manipulate circumstances or rush through the process. Instead, we rest in the knowledge that God has everything under control. Even when things seem to be delayed, we can trust that God is working all things together for our good. His timing is perfect, and He will make everything beautiful when the time is right. As we look ahead to the start of May, we must remind ourselves that God's timing is never in a hurry. It is not based on our deadlines, our expectations, or our desire for immediate results. God's timing is always deliberate, purposeful, and filled with wisdom. When we trust in His timing, we experience peace, patience, and a deeper understanding of His divine plan. Everything that has happened in your life, the waiting, the delays, the setbacks, has been orchestrated by God in His perfect timing. And when the time is right, He will bring everything together for your good and for His glory. In the end, as we stand at the threshold of a new season, let us fully embrace the truth that everything in our lives is unfolding according to God's perfect plan and timing. The uncertainties, the waiting, and the delays are not signs of God's absence or neglect, but rather they are a part of the divine process that prepares us for the next step in His purpose for us. Trusting in God's timing allows us to let go of the pressure to control our circumstances and to rest in the assurance that He is working everything together for our good. As we move forward, let us hold firm to the belief that God has everything planned for the start of May and beyond, and that His plan for us is not just a path of success, but a journey of growth, learning, and transformation. No matter what we face, we can trust that God is in control, and in His perfect time, all things will come to fruition just as He has promised.